It won't come to you as a surprise if I tell you that PvP is an essential part of the Wild West. And with over 80 weapons in the game, let's just say there's no shortage of ways to engage in combat with other players and NPCs. But how did these 80 plus weapons come to be? And which specific ones did players use the most throughout the years? If you're asking yourself these questions, then look no further than this video, because we're about to dive into the Wild West history to find out the answer. As per usual, we have to start in the year 2018, when the game is officially in full development, but it isn't made available to the public just yet. In these prehistoric times, the small community that was patiently awaiting the first official release of the Wild West were given a couple of sneak peeks about the arsenal of weapons that you would be able to use once the game had been released. But for now, these were very few. They only included the mule shotgun, the bow, the Lamar revolver, the Peacekeeper revolver, and the Yellow Boy rifle. But even if these little glimpses into the future were small, they would set a good precedent for what was to come, and they serve as a perfect segue into 2019. Now that anyone can access the game for 50 Robux, the player base was bound to find some overpowered way to fight against each other. And as you'd expect, this didn't take very long to happen. You see, in the very first version of the Wild West, players could use their 7 hotbar slots however they wanted. When I say however, I mean it. You could have any amount of rifles and pistols equipped. If you wanted to use 3 rifles at a time, along with 4 pistols, you technically could. The only limiting factor was that there weren't a ton of weapons available at the time. More specifically, the only guns were the Peacekeeper, Model 3, and Lamar revolvers, alongside the Yellow Boy and Lynx rifles. You'll see just how big this list of available guns gets as time goes by. But going back to the 7 hotbar slots that you could use however you wanted, I think you can see where this is going as far as the meta is concerned. Cause yep, players would just equip as many weapons as they possibly could, and they would simply switch to the next one as soon as they ran out of ammo. Now, I couldn't find any footage of this method being used with all 6 guns, but it's pretty well documented in the Wild West wiki. And even if the meta didn't really change, as players could literally use any gun they wanted and they didn't have to select any specific ones, I think that it's still relevant to say that in March of 2019, 2 new guns were added, the sawed-off shotgun and the Sharps rifle. And as I previously said, the meta still didn't change, so they just added 2 new guns that you could switch to whenever you ran out of ammo. But the much bigger changes came in August of 2019. This is when the version 2.0 of the Wild West dropped. And with it came a few important changes to the hotbar and to the amount of weapons you could purchase. First thing first, this is when the hotbar that we all know and love was first introduced. And as you can see, you can only carry 1 primary and 2 sidearms in this version of the hotbar. Cause it seems that the devs realized that being able to carry 7 guns around isn't very balanced, and neither is it very realistic. And secondly, this update added 2 extra guns, the mule shotgun and the harmonica rifle. And when you hear that the mule shotgun was introduced and that it was made so now you could only carry 3 guns, I think you know what this entails as far as the meta goes. Yup, this is pretty much when the good old mule spamming began. And you have to consider that back in these days, the mule shotgun was even more OP, so players really did have a reason to complain. But anyways, later, in the month of November of 2019, 2 last guns would be added for this year, the Navy revolver and the Winchester rifle. And that's how we move on to 2020. The game is now free, but as far as PvP is concerned, the most important update in this year was the Factions update, which completely changed the landscape of the Wild West PvP. Players were no longer fighting to kill an outlaw, or just to duel. They were now representing a faction. Whether that faction was a group of friends, or one of those that tried ridiculously hard to replicate a real-life military system, didn't really matter. The fact is that players now had a bigger motive to PvP and fight against each other, which, alongside the addition of 2 new guns like the Log Pistol and the Hartford rifle, made for a perfect combination for the most infamous and polemic PvP method in the Wild West to be born. And you know it, it's quick switching. Obviously, quick switching had always been possible up to this date, but the faction community is what really popularized it, which is why I'm covering it now. So what is quick switching? Well, at its core, quick switching consists of switching from one weapon to the other in order to skip the cocking or chambering animation of your guns so that you can have a higher rate of fire. Now, it's important to note that this was a glitch, and it wasn't meant to be put in the game by the devs. But either way, when it was combined with quick movements such as spinning or strafing, it made for the most effective way to PvP, by far. And you may be wondering what guns were used to quick switch back in the day. Well, the meta was pretty well cemented, as there were 3 guns that were undisputably the best ones to quick switch. For the primary, it was the Lynx, for its high headshot multiplier and its high accuracy. Then there was the Navy Revolver, for its high damage and its fast reloading and fire rate. And last but certainly not least was the Lock Revolver, which in my opinion was by far the most OP weapon in this meta thanks to its sprint fire feature. This was a glitch that made it so you could fanfare the lock without having to stop sprinting, meaning you could unleash its full fire rate while jumping and spinning around to avoid being hit by an enemy. Here's what a typical quick switching combo would look like using these 3 guns. As you can see, using quick switch was a no-brainer. You could basically send a thunderstorm of bullets flying towards your enemy in a matter of seconds, whilst moving around rapidly. So yeah, the popularization of quick switching is pretty much the only thing that would mark 2020. Which means we can now move on to 2021. What makes this year most notable is of course the auction update, which initially added 6 new guns. The Patterson Navy, the Prototype Pistol, the Lancaster Pistol, the Geica Chain Pistol, the Geica Chain Carbine, and the Spitfire. And these new additions to the available arsenal would of course change the meta, but they weren't the biggest factor that made it change. Because other than adding auction weapons, this update also patched the lock sprint fire feature and made the Navy Revolver's draw speed a bit longer, which was enough to completely kill the 2020 version of quick switching. But quick switching as a whole was far from being over, because it really didn't take long for players to use these new shiny auction guns to their advantage. And since the devs only nerfed the version of quick switch that used the Lock Revolver and the Navy Revolver, well, the player base figured out they could use the brand new Prototype Pistol and Patterson Navy to make a new deadly quick switching combo, choosing the latter for its huge headshot multiplier and devastating damage, and the former for its high fire rate and incredibly fast reload speed. As of the Lynx, it remained untouched, so that just stayed in the meta. This more modern version of quick switching was less overpowered than the last one, but it was still definitely the best way to PvP. Here's what that would look like. And I'm sorry for the bad image quality, I don't know what I was recording on when I was a Faction Monkey. But yeah, you get the gist of it. It was pretty much the same thing, except that instead of using Navy and Lock, most people would use the Prototype Pistol and the Patterson Navy. And until now I've been talking as if the Lynx was an undisputed choice for the primary weapon, but a lot of people use the Hartford rifle or even the Winchester rifle. And this method of quick switching would persist until 2022, when things would drastically change. On the 31st of October of that year, the worst Halloween nightmare of every single quick switcher would become a reality. Because on this day, quick switching was completely patched. This was done by making it so you can no longer sprint and switch weapons at the same time. As you can see, my sprinting is interrupted each time I switch weapons. This is because the game now forces you to walk between each switch. But of course, the TWW community, being the TWW community, found a way to bypass this nerf. This is the latest edition of quick switching, which is called 232 or 323, which refers to the keys you have to press to equip your different sidearms. And I won't go into details because I myself don't really know how to do this, but I know that it basically consists of quickly switching from one sidearm to another to cancel out the walking animation in between each switch. And believe it or not, we can now jump all the way to the present day. This is because from the end of 2022 to 2025, nothing really changed. The status quo was maintained, with the devs surprisingly not patching 232, probably due to the fact that it doesn't have as big of a user base as old quick switching did, and most players started becoming more original with their loadouts. But there's no doubt that there are still a couple of weapons that reign over the other ones, such as the Lancaster, which after the Prototype and Patterson Navy nerfs is widely accepted as the best sidearm, or some newer weapons such as the Marlin trench gun, which is known to be extremely overpowered. And as far as the trench gun goes, I can't really speak for myself because I don't own it. I am still sane and haven't lost hours of my life grinding for the malicious kill, but here's what someone who did has to say. So yeah, trust me, if the guy who maxed out almost every single skill in the game says the gun is OP, it is OP. Also, if you like progression stuff, you should check out his latest video. But anyways, I think that it's fair to say that nowadays, 2-3-2 quick switching is still the most efficient way to PvP, but since it's logged behind a pretty significant skill barrier, most people would just use the most spammy weapon they have at hand, or they're gonna be original and make their own loadout. And that's pretty much it for the history of PvP in the Wild West. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I would really appreciate if you subscribed if you did enjoy it, because it did take me a whole bunch of time to put this video together. And finally, here's a few people that I want to thank for helping in the making of this video. So yeah, I'll see you guys in the next episode of the Wild West History.